This idea of because I said so, the phrase that so many of us will have heard and may well have used in our own lives, it feels like such a big one to me, both in the way that it can limit by restricting our ability to make our own choices, to listen to our own wisdom, to acknowledge our own experience. And it feels big in the way it could potentially cause expansion if we reframe it in some way, or through a deliberate choice to contradict the inherent command that sits within those words to take the conditioned path. So I'm delighted that Susan is going to be with me today, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts and reflections once you've listened to our conversation. Welcome to the Henny Flynn podcast, the podcast that's all about deepening our self-awareness with profound self-compassion. I'm Henny. I write, coach and speak about how exploring our inner world can transform how we experience our outer world, all founded on a bedrock of self-love. Settle in and listen and see where the episode takes you.
When the dynamics that we got as kids, we see in larger contexts, it's no surprise, right? It's just like we become grown-ups and we say, I'm the president, and because I say so.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was so hello everybody and welcome to Susan. We kind of like we realized we were starting to talk, and I just pressed record. So you've just heard the middle bit of a brilliant thing that Susan said, but we will circle back. So anyway, hello Susan.
Oh, darling. It's so great to see you.
So I realized every time we talk, there's this kind of moment where we say hello, and then there's just me like laughing, and then you laugh, and then anyway. So this topic of because I said so, it actually feels pretty serious, I think, despite our lightheartedness, because just to pick up on something that you just said, I'm not sure if I caught it on the recording, was that it gets imprinted within us. And that, I think, relates to so many of the phrases that I've been exploring over the last few weeks in the podcast. And there was one response I had from someone. I've had lots of messages, interestingly, because these are old things inside us, aren't they? These words, they land when we're very young, and so we carry them for a long time. And someone wrote to me and said that there was an affirmation she'd come across, and it felt like it really related to this topic of because I said so. There is no power outside of me that can ever determine my well-being, my future, or my potential. And she said she'd come across this affirmation and she really just felt, no, that is the thing I need to remember, because she recognized she'd been absorbing these statements from childhood. Too big.
Could you say it again? Could you say it again? Because it's sometimes with these things,
it's like
when they're really good, I don't always catch them right away.
So this affirmation is: there is no power outside of me that can ever determine my well-being, my future, or my potential. Mm-hmm. And it feels to me that this statement, because I said so, is in direct conflict with that. It's basically saying, I determine what gets spoken about here. I determine what you think. I determine what you do, because I said so.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, I mean, I think it's wide reaching. In my version of this, when I was growing up, was you have nothing to cry about, right? You're not right. So the the message was, or you've got nothing to be angry about, or it's like this external force is coming in and saying, you're not feeling correctly in this situation, and I'm going to tell you how you should be feeling.
Yeah. Oh God, you've got nothing to cry about. Do you know, so slight segue, you know, in the first 5 minutes. When I was leaving my last big corporate role, the senior leader that I had a conversation with, I'm being very careful so that no one can identify who this person is, but anyway, the senior leader that I had a conversation with when I was confirming that I was going to go, for whatever reason, that person in the room with me and the way I was feeling just activated this high emotion that resulted in me crying in the meeting. And clearly, you know, my first thought was, this isn't a great look. You know, here I am trying to be assertive and say, no, this is what I need, but like high emotion. And they said, you don't need to cry. There's no need to cry. And I felt this like woomph of energy come down inside me. And I said, you don't have a bleep, bleep, bleep.
Yes.
right to say that to me.
Yeah.
And nor can you determine when it is or not okay for me to cry.
That's right. That's right.
So it's really interesting because, God, when you said it, I had this like,
yeah,
feeling.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is what we were saying before too, is that when we hear that when we're young, I mean, I'm thinking about the person, I'm thinking with actually quite some compassion for both parents and the person in the meeting with you, right? Ill-equipped to deal with emotion. And so wanting to shut it down, and thinking that maybe in some ways it's like, it's, you know, you don't have to cry.
Yeah. In some ways, wanting to bring comfort, but you're absolutely right. It was because
sort of an ass backwards comfort, but yes,
their inability to deal with that emotion, or to deal with also to deal with the challenge that brought with it, because it demonstrated meaning. It demonstrated you know, that this was really important. And actually, it's much easier if we can just skate over the surface of life and not attach meaning and importance to things. So because I said so is a, you haven't got anything to cry about.
Yeah.
Push away, move on.
Yeah.
Shut it down. Yeah.
Neaten it up. We don't want any too messy. This is messy and sort of unclear, and
I don't like
it doesn't make sense to me logically to see you crying in the situation.
And I don't like the way it makes me feel. So we're gonna shut it down.
Yeah.
But I just want to pick up. I think this is really important what you said about the compassion, the sense of compassion toward the parent that said you've got nothing to cry about, and to that person in the meeting room. And just I'd love to talk a bit more about why people perhaps do use those phrases, and so we don't come at this from a place of judgment, you know, or seem to be coming at this from a place of judgment. You know, this is completely understandable.
Right.
That a tired parent says to a child, because I said so.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that is part of it, is what I was talking about. Like I don't want this sort of this messy business going on. It's like, from my perspective as the adult in this situation, probably the tired adult in this situation, I don't have the bandwidth or the inclination to unpack the mess that is behind that. And it's just easier to shut it down. But I also think it's what you said too, is like, and it makes, I feel something in response to that is not comfortable to me. And boy, I can really imagine that in a corporate setting. Even if it was an HR person, but even so, HR, they've got to have hankies on the desk, don't they? But
not always.
yeah, maybe not. But yeah, it's like, yeah. I mean, as you pointed out so clearly, it's that there is so much going on that you are not privy to, that to say that is wholly out of bounds. But it's also wholly understandable. And for me, I don't know if I've ever said that I'm a stepmom. I'm not a mom, but I'm a stepmom. And I don't think that was something I said, but the times that I wanted to say it, it felt like that this emotional response was going to like take over whatever else was going on. Maybe I don't have time to unpack this with you. Maybe, are you kidding me right now? Like, like what has gone on the earlier in the day? Has there been a lot of histrionics, or and then you're going to come out and cry with me? Oh, please.
Yeah. And also, but there's something in there about, because I was talking with Anton about this before we came on the call, and he was saying, well, sometimes, for parents, it's fair enough. It's like, I haven't got time for this. And I said, but that's a very, very different expression. Saying, I haven't got time for this could potentially lead into, we can talk about it later.
Right.
And setting a time to talk about it.
Yes.
Or the other phrase that he said was, you've got to trust me on this. And
totally
I
different.
found that really interesting, because that implies that you have built trust. Whereas, because I said so, is a shutdown. You don't have to have trust. You just have to have an authoritarian rule over what is going on.
Right.
And so actually, kind of as a parent, or as a step parent, I think there's something quite interesting about just being really aware of the impact of those kind of phrases. If we, have young people in our lives, just recognizing how those different phrases can sound and where they can lead to.
Right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you use the word authoritarian, and I think that's part of it. I think there's also like a hierarchy, which authoritarianism is dependent on a hierarchical structure. It's like, I am here and I am running this show, and so I am going to tell you how it's going to go. Which is very different. I agree with you that it's different than saying, I don't have time for this now, but we can circle back later tonight, or whatever. Or trust me, you've got, it feels so different. I mean, you're right that in kind of both of those cases, what you're looking at is trust either being built or having been built. So, trust being built is, I don't have time for this now, but I can come back to this later. And then actually doing that's building trust. And then, trust me, means that has happened in the past.
Yeah, I love that. I love that reflection. And yes, and where the kind of shutdown statement comes from is a place of, I don't need to build trust, because
yes,
I have the authority, and
it's
this sort of, it demands this unquestioning acceptance of that authority. And I think that is where it starts to become a little bit sort of dangerous. And I suppose it's also like, we might, maybe as we look back on our childhood, we might not necessarily remember hearing those exact words, or like you said, as parental figures or caregivers, we might not necessarily have used those words, but there's something about the essence of it, of that unquestioning demand for my authority to be followed, that I think is what can lead to some quite uncomfortable behaviors in adulthood, because we stop trusting ourselves or stop believing that we are able to question authority. It can lead to that quite blinkered thinking, because that's what keeps us safe. It might be what kept us safe as a child, was not to challenge.
Right.
Not to.
Yes. So I think there's two sides of it. I think you're absolutely right. There's the part of, do I question what is being told to me or asked of me or anything like that? It's funny that this morning I was thinking about our conversation, and I had this recollection when I was like school age kid, and my mother had said, wear a coat, put this coat on, it's cold. My husband often jokes, it's like, put a coat on, mommy's cold. So that's what my mother said, put a coat on, mommy's cold. And so I put on the coat to go to the bus stop, and I got outside and I was like, this is ridiculous, it's not cold. So I took the coat and I stuffed it in the mailbox, and I thought it was brilliant. Came back on the way home, pulled it out of the mailbox, like, right. Well, it turns out my dad had seen me do it from the window, and I got in trouble because my mother had told me something and I had questioned it, right? I had said, wait a minute, it's not that cold, and I'm not cold. So it's, so there's the questioning. There's the questioning of the outside, but then there's also, it becomes the distrust of my own experience, my own emotions, my own sensations, my own thoughts. I start to go out there to look for the answer.
Yeah.
Instead
what do I
of,
think? Tell me.
Yeah, what do I think? What am I? How do I feel about this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting, because this is where it becomes this the reinforcement of other narratives that we've absorbed. And if we have this overarching message, it's really why I kind of left this one till the end of this little sort of series, because it just feels like it is such an overarching one, that it would reinforce all of the messaging, all of that kind of limited thinking, or as you say, the sort of urge to look outside of ourselves for external validation, this kind of locus of control sitting, extrinsic from us, and not trusting what is going on inside our own body. And actually, that is where we see such conflict. I mean, I see that a lot with clients, where they've absorbed a message or a story about needing validation externally, but actually the conflict is that their inner voice is saying something completely different. They just don't know how to hear it.
Right. Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. And yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it can be tricky, because we do need other people to help us see ourselves, right? We do need approval. We do need that. There's, there can be this feeling of like, I don't need,
we're not an island. No man is.
We are not. We're not. And so there's a young person who's in my purview, and he's an athlete, and he tends to be super self-critical and never thinks he's good enough. And it's only that he starts to change his mind if he's hearing it from somebody else. And I when I hear about that, or when I observe that, I have a sort of mixed feelings. It's like, part of me, I totally get it. I don't know. I'm 14 and what do I know about, this sport I'm playing or whatever. But there's part of me that just, my heart breaks a little and just like, oh, darling, what do you think? Like, how does it feel to you when you make that shot? And if nobody else saw it, how would it feel to you? Right. And so I think that it is a little tricky, but as always, when we swing 100% in one direction, that's that's not where thriving lies. Right.
As I'm listening to you, I'm mindful of something that I think we've touched on either in email or in this conversation, maybe, about the impact of this shutting down of the internal awareness of our inner experience or our inner voice on the body, on like how we kind of physically show up in the world, or because so my as I'm sort of saying this, I'm kind of thinking, because actually, if we don't listen to our bodies, if we learn not to listen to that inner voice, we can end up really hurting ourselves, end up not responding when something is painful. For example, just thinking about that athlete, if that athlete isn't aware and really listening to their body, you can end up with a really serious injury. That's a very practical thing, but you can also end up with deep emotional damage as well, if we're not listening to when something doesn't feel right emotionally.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, emotionally, I mean, physically, I mean, just as a woman in the world, how many times did I override my knowing that something didn't feel okay or right, or and said okay, or said yes, either explicitly or implicitly, to something that was not a yes for me. And so I think that it's dangerous. And I mean, my whole career, really, it was based on this whole question, was this desire to turn that around for people who perhaps had, like me, been looking at externally for direction and I guess guidance, information, how to do it right, kind of thing, and focusing on as much as we possibly can on just what's happening inside of you. So moving, for example, with less focus on what you're doing, but how it feels, and playing with different what's, right, different ways of moving, but with the pure intention of just seeing how it feels.
I mean, that's incredibly freeing, actually. Just listening to you there, immediately it makes me want to close my eyes and just feel, well, how is it for me to be sat here at this desk? What does my body feel like sat here? And when I sort of then build in what you're saying about, like, how does movement feel, rather than looking at someone else in the room or on the screen and going, oh, but they can lift their arm right up,
Right.
and I can only lift it so far.
Exactly. It's like this whole, the whole thing around doing it right, which, yes. And getting approval for doing it right. It's huge. I mean, it's funny. I'm talking to you now. I'm sitting on the floor, and I sit on the floor with the intention of listening to my body. And just because the floor is not as comfortable as like a chair that's hugging my whole little self, I'm going to be moving around because I'm going to listen to my body. And when my ankle starts to feel a little crampy, then I move to a different position, right? And it's a constant dialogue between how I'm sitting and what I'm feeling. Is this, Yeah. So, but man, those messages really die hard. And it is so challenging for me to really fully embody and embrace my own experience, just to say, okay, that's not that this is what it is for me right now. So yeah. Oof.
And I think so. There's this this very strong sort of thread here where the risk is that when that becomes an internalized message from an authority figure, it becomes our conditioning. We stop being able to think for ourselves, or at least not so sort of fully and completely that we're able to challenge what we might consider to be authority figures as we're growing into adulthood. And then the other side of it is that perhaps it makes us rebel. Perhaps it's also the thing that makes us dig our heels in, shout no. But my sort of feeling, and there's a part of me that's like, yeah, like do it, in the same way that, my response to that person in that meeting, I might not respond to that person in the meeting in the same way now, because I feel as though I'm much more at the time I was very like heightened, and I was like, no, you do not have the right to say that to me. I didn't really shout, but actually that rebellious sort of response might not be what really serves us either.
Right. Yeah.
Because really what I think now I would have said, it's curious you want me to stop crying.
Yes. Interesting. Yes. But I love that.
Yeah, but that rebellious sort of thing, because actually that's kind of coming from that adolescent energy.
Sure.
And we know we hold that.
Yes.
As we mature.
Yeah. It is, I appreciate that. So the other thing that's coming up for me is that as we have experience with ourselves and with others, for me, there's a discernment about communication. Right. And so, I mean, I don't think that I had access to this as a kid. But as you say now, it's like, oh, interesting. You want me to wear a coat today. That feels really important to you. And interesting. And how do I interpret that? Like, it's like, oh, she cares about me. She thinks that it's important. I don't know. Right. And so, but this can happen inside of ourselves too. Right. That this is part of, to me, why embodiment and really cultivating our own relationship with our own experience is that we can start to uncover layer. Oh, I see. you are irritated with everybody right now. And I'm saying this to myself, right? And I realized that, yes, that happens right before dinner. When you're hungry, you're tired, you've had a long day, and everything's rubbing you the wrong way. And so those feelings are totally legit. And they're yours.
Yeah. And so in that example of I'm really frustrated with everybody, that can bring us into that place where we start to shut down the calmer, I don't know, sort of parts of us that might ordinarily have like smoothed over troubled water. That part can become very dominant, and so we won't even listen, and unless we build this practice of the internal conversation, it's very easy to squash the awareness that I really need to eat something because I'm being a bit tricksy right now. Like, I've got to get some food in this body, because that critical part just goes, no, this is what I'm feeling, and
yes, and
it's
they are
because
being
I
such
said
a
yeah, because I said
tricksy. I am being tricksy in this moment. I am completely borrowing that instantly. Yes. Yeah. Right. That's interesting. So there is a squashing that's going on. And that's yes, internal squashing. But it's not, it's sort of the more grounded, centered part that's getting the squashing rather than the tender hurting part.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
interesting.
And I think the same thing is playing out in a parental child dynamic. The child is getting squashed, and so we then absorb that message and we squash our own internal child.
Yeah.
You know, the part that goes, but I'm frightened, or I really don't like that person, or don't think this feels like the right place for me to be in right now. Squash it. Don't listen to it. You know, we understand from these external sources that this is what we're meant to be doing. And so because they said so, that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I also, I was sort of thinking about, there were two things actually. One was a really interesting phrase where I did a bit of research to see like whether has this been sort of analysed, and interestingly there has been a bit of work on it. One of the papers I read, academic papers, was talking about how obedience equals love. We learn that obedience equals love. So as a child, we are obedient to the authority figure, and we learn that through our obedience, that's how we express love.
And get love.
And get love.
I mean, to me, it's like, yes, like you are going to protect me, and and my sense of belonging comes from obedience. And I think you're right too. I'm also saying I love you because I'm gonna wear.
Look at me, I'm so good.
I'm doing what. I'm doing what you said. I'm doing what you said.
Yeah. And I think it sort of goes beyond that sort of that aspect of the imposter complex, you know, the whole people pleasing thing. It goes a bit beyond into, you know, some behavior where you're potentially really denying the truth of what is actually going on. And then the other thing that I was thinking about was the I had to look this up because I was kind of quiz anyway, what the actual expression is: quis custodiet ipsos custodes. Who guards the guards? So who is to say that what is being said is right?
Right.
You know, this kind of like this philosophical question, which actually I think kids are really good at challenging, which is like, well, how do you know?
Says who? Yeah.
Yeah, says who? Like, and as adults, there's this kind of I think it's part of our job is to say, well, this is what I feel is right. I might be wrong, but let's go with it right now.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think that there's sort of something quite interesting about when we become so convinced of our own authority. I think often it means that we're losing sight of the fact that there could be another way of thinking, being, doing.
Isn't it interesting that what you're saying here really reminds me of the idea of beginner's mind. And I may not have the phrase exactly right, but in the beginner's mind there are many ways, and in the expert's mind there is only one. Something like that. And I love that. And I also see, the longer I'm on the planet, the more experty my mind can get, and how important it is for me to be doing things, or either approaching old things with a more beginnery way, or doing things as a beginner and allowing myself to be in that, expansive, like so many possibilities kind of situation. Yeah. I was not one to question when I was young. No, say like, well, why was not a big, I think probably because it was not a welcomed question in the environment I grew up in. But yeah, that's
demonstrated in the fact that you took the coat off and tucked it in the mailbox.
Yes,
rather than
I was. Yeah,
just took the coat off and went, no.
Yeah, I know. Right. Exactly. It's like I was trying to get it both ways, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that is what can happen, is that there can be this kind of slippery, sneaky kind of thing. It's like, how do I, on one level, from your perspective, I'm doing what you say, but then I'm also kind of saying.
And so bring that forward into adulthood, into the workplace, for example. And if we get an authoritarian leader, which, quite frankly, I've definitely worked with them. I expect most of us have. And you get that sort of slippery kind of like, okay, like, and I have definitely worked with people who've sat in meetings and gone, yep, and then walked out and gone, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
And then there's me, who's quite a simple creature, who's just sitting there going, no, that's not, it doesn't make sense. I don't get it.
Yeah. And, and when faced with that, the authoritarian is most likely to be like, no, you didn't hear me, perhaps, when I said that this is what we're going to do. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? Yeah.
And actually, the impact, I was just going to say, sorry, the impact on an organization of people saying yes and doing no is catastrophic, actually. It just wastes so much time. And I think in a relationship as well, I mean, fundamentally, I suppose what we're coming to here is the importance for good communication within ourselves, within our relationships, and and within the working environment.
Yeah. I think that's right. And so one of the examples that I wanted to bring forward in our conversation was, and on a more internal level, sometimes we find ourselves in situations where what we used to understand in our sensations to mean a particular thing stops meaning that. The meaning starts to change. So here's the example is about a year ago, and then before that, a year and a half before that, I broke my foot. And there were a whole bunch of sensations, as you can imagine, around that. Both of those experiences, they were physical sensations, they were emotional sensations, and they were mental calculations. It's like, what is happening inside my body? And over time, I am gratefully and tremendously healed. My body is working great. And every once in a while, I get a sensation in my foot that I have basically, because of the injury, have been trained to associate a particular meaning, like something's wrong. When actually it's a little sensation that 5 years ago I probably wouldn't have even noticed. But now all the alarms go off. All the panic and the worry and the setting up of the doctor's appointments and all of that kind of thing. And what I read a lot of research, and our ability to sense ourselves from the inside is called interoception. So this is our internal, what allows us to sense that we're hungry and have to use the bathroom, and all of those kinds of things are all interoception. And when there has been trauma in particular, and sort of ironically, if you have been very trained in somatic work so that you're really attentive to your body, it can kind of turn around on itself and require you to reevaluate the communication. This is sort of what I was alluding to before. It's like, when my mom tells me to wear a coat, I can say in my head, she's saying that because she loves me and she wants me to be okay. And so now when I feel a sensation in my foot, I get curious about, like, what is it actually saying, right? So
rather than leaping into the assumption there must be something wrong, because
that's right.
That's how I learned what this message meant.
That's right. You're right. That's what the injury taught me. And now there's got to be some retraining. And I think in our relationship with ourselves, but the same thing holds true for all of our relationships, is that can we get curious about what is actually being communicated here? What is my body actually telling me? What is my partner, my friend actually telling me?
What's actually being said in that meeting in the 20-floor building? Yeah.
Oh gosh, it's so complicated too. I mean, it's complicated enough with just one person or two people, but a room full of 20 people and all of them are, yeah, I don't miss those days of.
I don't miss those days. But learnt an awful lot while I was there.
Sure.
Wouldn't not have been there. But there was a little point there. It's completely gone. Say what you just said. I might edit this bit out. There was something about it's completely gone.
Okay. Well, I bet it'll come back. But yeah, I think that part of it is the complexity. Part of it is communication. Part of it is maybe our ability to listen in a different way. So I'll give an example from my relationship.
I know.
You got it? Go.
I got it. Okay. So the thing is that when in relation to this sort of phrase, because I said so, this starts to build that compassion actually for what might be sitting inside the reason why somebody would say it. because the learning that we have gathered in our life brings us to this point where it feels like the only response that we can have. We're kind of stuck in that place of shut down. Whereas what you're talking about is, don't shut it down. And also, because actually, almost in a way, what you're saying about with your foot, by going off into a kind of triggered, activated response, it's a bit like shutting down the rest of you.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas what we're sort of saying is, it's always about, if we know that we've internalized this message in some way, this kind of shutdown message, it's all about actually being able to like soften and open up a bit wider and say, okay, well, what is it actually telling me? What are the cues I'm actually hearing here? And the reason for mentioning, in that sort of corporate environment, because actually what is going on for that person who's saying, because I said so, very likely there's some other massive thing behind a door that nobody else in the room knows anything about. And they're just trying to firefight in the best way that they can.
Right. And probably it's somebody, given these hierarchical situations, it's probably somebody above them is saying, because I say so.
Yeah. Yeah.
It all just like bumps down the waterfall of,
just as in a family unit, the parent was probably told it by their grandparent, by their parent, by their parent, by their parent, and it cascades down through the line. All systems operate in the same way. And as you're saying, like our internal, we're a system.
Sure.
We have a system inside us. So you were going to sort of say about an anecdote that.
Yes, right. Yes. So for years, my beloved husband, I would tell him something that I was planning to do. And every once in a while, he would say, do as you like. And what I heard was, do as you like, you dumbass.
I was going to say, I don't care.
And maybe that, but that was not what I heard. And what was so great was that after, an embarrassingly long amount of time, I said, when you say that, I hear, do as you like, you dumbass. And he says, oh, no. That's not at all. I am saying, I want you to do as you like. But then he sort of laughed and said, and also maybe a little bit, that's not what I would do. Right. So it's connected with like, because I say so, it's like, that's not what I would do. That's sort of like the watered down version. But what was so great about it was that we went into an inquiry together. And we looked at it, and I said how it landed with me. He said what he meant to say, and also what other things that might be under the surface. And now we say it all the time, but we say it with a very different energy. It's more like, do as you like,
It's actually within that thing of, it might not be what I would do. Fair enough. I'm not you. You have a completely different set of life influences from me, and you are a very different person, and that's a wonderful thing.
Yes.
But the do as you like, you dumbass. It's very difficult for a British person to say dumbass. That's judgmental. Whereas the other one is kind of like, I'm different from you.
Yeah.
Do it that way.
Yeah.
And
that's like you were talking about the parental messages of like, You've got to trust me, which is not the same as because I say so. Yeah. But I think I put it out there just as an example of something that for a really long time would really feel painful to me, and I didn't inquire about it for years. And then to say, wait a minute, when you say that, what do you mean?
Yeah. And that inquiry in a relationship, so where we feel perhaps that we're being shut down or limited in some way, the maybe might have activated something from our childhood, so that we hear it in a particular way.
Sure.
To actually bring that inquiry, obviously when it feels safe to do so, and to ask the question, or to say, it makes me feel this way, is, oh God, if only we did that more.
Yeah.
There was a brilliant quote that I came across, and as ever, can't remember who said it, where it said that the greatest mistake that we can make is to believe that others think the same way we do. And we can take that with any phrase, actually, because we imbue meaning into words. So, so kind of understanding where we've, that kind of like, stay on the focus of this topic today, we might have internalized this story that we need to seek external validation, or that we can't trust our own judgment. We need to always ask everybody else when we're making a decision. We meet lots of people who are in that place, and actually what we're saying is bring that inquiry into ourselves then, and say, okay, what is it that feels tricky here?
Right.
Or, I don't know.
Or what feels true? What feels really true? Yeah. Or what feels off? Either way.
And in a relationship, expressing that's tricksy for me to hear that. Tricksy, our new word.
I love it. Yeah. And I think that part of what's tricky about being a human with a mind is that I think that assumption that other people must think the same thing is really easy. I mean, we're so kind of trapped in our own perceptive experience. And so it feels impossible that anything could be different. And so here is where the inquiry directed in all kinds of different directions, both internally and externally. It's like, wait, what's actually happening here? And
because one of my questions was going to be, what happens when we break free of that story of because I said so, whether that's internal, in a relationship, in a family dynamic, workplace, whatever. Like how do we break free? And it feels to me that this act of internal or external inquiry, with compassion, with non-judgment, just, so I wonder how it would have been, as a however old you were, with your mum telling you to put your coat
on, right.
If you'd be able to say,
why does that feel important? It's April and it's lovely out. And I think that feels exactly the thing, whether we're interpreting messages from our own bodies, our own minds, or the people around us, is just, I like that. Just keep reminding ourselves that it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, they don't necessarily aren't thinking the same thing you're thinking. And
it's okay to challenge. It's okay to
question. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
okay to question. Yeah, there's a great line, there's a song I used in class today that says, to question is to grow. And I think that's right, both personally and interpersonally. And it's been, for me personally, in regards to reinterpreting my own physical sensation, it's been a fascinating education to gather information from some sources, and then just to really pay attention to what's happening, and letting myself relearn. It's like relearning the language of my own experience. And I guess a part of my point is that in all relationships, that language is going to be changing.
Yeah. That
it is not just like any language, the meaning of a particular word or a phrase is not static. It's evolutionary. Yes.
That was the word. I was just thinking, it's like nothing is static,
Sure.
And actually that, and as we mature and our bodies start telling us different things, knowing like, which bit do I listen to and which bit do I just go, okay, that's okay, I just need to do a bit of stretching to help that out,
right.
And our emotional landscape changes, and also like, as in relation with others as well, we can never assume that the other person remains static too.
Right.
So always allowing, I think this reminds me of that conversation we had about balance, actually, that this thing about always like bringing ourselves back into that place of balance. And it also speaks to compassionate wisdom, this idea of like, well, really listening in to ourselves in order to understand, well, what is really going on here? How do I really feel? It's really important.
Yeah, I love that recalling, going back to the balance conversation, because I think that one of the things that feels really important in regards to physical balance is that you're never there. You're never there. It's always it's a moving thing. It's a dynamic thing. It's a verb. It's not a noun. And because I say so is like the definite. It's the noun. It's the black and white, the binary. It's like right and wrong and yes and no.
Yeah.
And this is not
brilliant. Drop the
way it is.
Susan. Honestly, I got a little tingle as you said that. It's so true. I think that is why, for me personally, actually noticing what's going on in my own body, when you just said it again, I had this like, no, because it brings out a binary response.
That's right. And I think that also speaks to your observation that it can be subservience, but it can also be rebellion.
Yeah.
And sometimes, as we pointed out, it can be both.
Yeah.
But it's definitely pushing up against this. It's a black and white thing. And
and sometimes, I think it's something I'm really curious about, and maybe this is for another day we have a conversation about like anger, and how anger can be a good thing, that like fierce, like no, getting ourselves out of a dangerous situation, whatever it might be, the absolutely sort of radical no to stuff that we see happening in the environment. And still there is this, how do we bring balance to that as well, so that it doesn't become like the dominant driving energy, because I also don't think that is helpful for our system.
Yeah.
We're talking about being in homeostasis. Well, anger is a spike.
Yeah.
And rebellion is a spike. I don't know. There's something in this which I find personally a bit confusing about, like, when that righteous, that's a big word, isn't it? God.
Yes, it is. That is kind of big word.
Rightful.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yes, I think there are times. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it is. It is a little slippery. And but I think that the observation that anger is not a bad thing, and it often provides the fire for change. And sometimes, yeah, that can go in a bunch of different directions, right? It can be an invitation to, if I have a blow up at somebody when it's in the evening and I haven't eaten all day or haven't eaten all afternoon and I'm tired, and that is like, okay, I don't want to do that. And I want to be aware of what's happening in myself so that I can stay more grounded and more kind. But when we see these things that, as you say, like, they makes no sense, and just a hard no.
So that's a mindful no.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose that's what we're saying here. That's where this sort of link seems to be, actually, is that this idea of because I said so is a mindless. It feels like the messaging is a mindless no. It's a knee jerk.
Yes.
No, I'm shutting it down.
Right.
There is no argument. There's nothing more to be said here.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas the kind of mindful, because maybe there are times, like as we were saying right at the beginning of this, there are times where, so you do just need to say to somebody, you need to trust me on this. We've just got to make this happen.
Right.
And that means building trust with ourselves, actually being able to say that to ourselves, like, you need to, when all the voices are in dissent, it's like, as we stand in our true, like, deep self, and being able to go, it's all right, everybody, you can trust me on this. This is what is right for us.
Yeah.
Rather than being overwhelmed by the inner critic or whoever it is that's dominating.
Yeah.
Wow, I feel like we've sort of come to an end.
No, I like it. I think there is a lot of energy behind this phrase. And it's one that we can really see the ramifications of using that kind of language in whatever context we use it, in all the relationships, all the permeations of relationship. And I really appreciate this whole series that you're doing, in that very often these phrases and these messages that we got are so the water that we swim in that we don't even see them. And so I think just even the small unpacking that we've done here today, I mean, I will never hear that phrase the same again. And even if I just have it like right here on the tip of my tongue, I will rethink that. And
And Reese,
Yeah.
it's what you said about it's the essence of the meaning. It's not necessarily those words, is it? But it's
Sure.
the
Yeah.
essence of that meaning. And I loved what you said about it's the water we swim in. You're so right. And I think that was kind of what drove this series, actually, because I kept sort of like coming up against others and going like, oh my God, that was definitely one from my childhood. And what has that meant for me? I thought we could close with a quote from Lady Gaga, which this is
Bring it.
this is a first, but I came across this quote and I just thought, oh, for me, it just said so much, actually, and it really speaks to what we've been talking about. She said, the reason I don't want anyone to control me is not because I want to be in control. I don't want anyone to control me because I don't want anyone to control anyone.
Wow.
I mean, that is
Tip of the cap to the lady. That is beautiful.
really is.
But boy, does that ever speak to, first of all, why it's such a hard phrase to receive, and how it's used, how that message is used. Oh, yeah, that's great.
And the ramifications it has socially, politically.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you, Susan. That was,
oh man, so great. Conversations with you are just like a really good meal.
I hope you're sated. Till next time, darling.
Yes.
So, as I reflected on that conversation with Susan, there were a couple of thoughts that came to me afterwards. One was that fundamentally, this is about being able to distinguish legitimate authority from authoritarianism. And it's also about remembering that these messages are not necessarily passed on because of a conscious desire to control or limit others. Rather, they can be an internal narrative that's being passed down through the generational or the systemic line. And as with so many of these things, it's really about finding this tender place of balance. As Susan says, balance is a verb, not a noun. And we're constantly shifting and moving in our awareness and understanding of what that really means for us as we deepen that inner awareness with that profound compassion for ourselves and, really importantly here as well, for others. So our role then, as we reshape the patterns of our life, is to embrace being empowered and also to love our sense of agency. Perhaps unlearning what we may have, maybe unwittingly, been taught by loving caregivers. And what I find so fascinating about this series, and it may be that as we move on into series 11, series 12 rather, there's only one more episode of this series to come, and I've got a plan for that one. But as we move on into season 12, it may be that we take some more of these kind of stock phrases, things that just get repeated throughout, families often, and sort of just very gently, kindly pull them apart and see, well, what's really sitting inside it and what might we be carrying from it. I have absolutely loved receiving your messages about this series, particularly because I think it speaks to the fact that we can internalize so many of these messages without even realizing that's what has happened. And to Susan's beautiful point, this is the water we swim in, and maybe paying some attention to the ripples and the way the light catches some of that water could really benefit us as we find our way. So, as ever, it has been an absolute joy being here with you, and a complete joy being with Susan. I just adore that woman, and I know, because I get so many messages from you guys as well about her, that you also really love listening to her too. And so it's wonderful to have had that shared experience together. And I send you a hug and a wave.